right, good day to you. We do hope and pray the peace of the Lord is upon you, your family, your whole entire household. If you have a business, just pray that you're leaning into that whenever you may be listening to this. My name is Justin Darren. I'm the pastor at the St. Louis Church of Christ.
I'm Jake Gregory, and one of the co-pastors of the new Restoration 5812 Church in St. Louis.
And I'm Nathan Workman. I'm the other co-pastor at Restoration 5812.
And Nathan also has been for 8-9 months now, helping
Almost
us.
a year.
Has it been a year?
Almost.
Jeez, time flies. Has been our worship leader, also helping us lead our worship and our worship team. And so we have just always historically here in central Michigan, in Gratiot County, in the wonderful town of St. Louis, had a very good working relationship.
Yeah.
Not just among our churches, but there's 5 or 6 other churches in town. And so let's jump in our discussion here this morning. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Kick us off.
Part of what we are, part of what we're going to do. I'll kind of introduce the idea of our podcast here.
Yeah,
great.
Since what we've been doing through the lockdown quarantine time is sharing basically a table and having a conversation, and it has led us to, and that's kind of replaced our Sunday morning gatherings, and so as we were doing that, we really just talked about how we wanted to kind of expand this into something that is much more of a weekly podcast, and we got to figure out some of the details of when that's going to be released, but we can tell you this. The podcast name is going to be GOSPELjazz. And what that really entails is in kind of the subtext of the title. Conversational improv through life, leadership, and Jesus. And really what we're trying to do is simply have an ongoing conversation about what it means to lead in the local church and in the local community. That's one of the things that we all really share, and really our group of pastors shares as well, is having a leadership role and a voice in the community that we're involved in. And what does that look like from a gospel-centered position? So that is kind of the tenor of what we're trying to do through this podcast, is just have an open conversation, talk about some tough things, but understand that we are pointed in the same direction, and having honest conversation in our culture, especially in things that we don't always agree, that can be tough sometimes. So we wanted to kind of begin knocking down some of those walls through this podcast. So today we're gonna kind of be we've spent a couple of hours talking through how we kind of get started in this. We've been kind of all over the place, but what we've kind of landed on is talking about the glory of God. This is something that is mentioned throughout Scripture of the glory of God showing up. Paul does a really good job in several of his letters talking about the glory of God that shows up in and through our lives. He does probably just a brilliant job of talking about how our lives are not about us. Our lives are really for the revealing of the glory of God. But then we kind of landed in some place, a place that is maybe difficult to define sometimes, and that is the sovereignty of God, and how it is that the sovereignty of God shows up, what that looks like, and then how is that reflected in the glory of God that we should be pursuing. So we make no promises in this first official podcast as to how we're going to land this. If we're going to land it, that's probably a more true statement than probably that.
Circling the airport.
Yeah, right, yes. Yeah. We'll circle the airport for a while.
Leave it unresolved.
Right, yes, the unresolved tension. So that's kind of where we're headed. We'll find out over the next little bit if we actually get there.
Well, I know for me, obviously we're filming this the first week of June of 2020. Obviously, a lot of racial tensions and things going on. Not that we don't want to talk about that. I think this is certainly part of this conversation. But again, in a broader context, and again, especially I think talking about the sovereignty of God. I took my first couple mission trips when I was in college. It was to Mexico. That was kind of the first kind of eye-opening experience for me to see people who, literally lived in tar paper shacks and dirt floors, but were content, were happy. Had an opportunity to go to Haiti back in 2010. It was about 6 months after the quake, and it's just one of those things where you're just overwhelmed, right? There's environmental issues with Haiti. There's obviously political and leadership issues there in Haiti, education issues, economic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I remember asking the missionary we were traveling with. I said, Jeff, what's the answer? He says, well, it's Jesus. And I just want to punch you in the face, right? Like, and he wasn't trying to Jesus juke me or anything like that. And I think that's even all these issues that we see in our country right now. And I think it's the answer that nobody wants. You go, this is going to take a return to some biblical values, to some Christian standards that go beyond race, that go beyond culture, right? That go beyond whatever political party, right? And again, now what does that look like? And we've, like you said, we spent almost 2 hours this morning wading through all of that, because these are some generational or multi-generational issues that we're not going to just fix overnight.
So we probably should say too this like Nathan said, this is kind of birthed as a podcast, birthed out of what we've been doing during the coronavirus shutdown for our churches. So we had spent time exploring what is the gospel, and that we believe that the gospel is Jesus is Lord, and then talking about a bunch of weeks going through different theological implications of that. And so, I mean, I just say that to say, if the gospel is Jesus is Lord, then then the kingdom that He comes to establish is the hope of the world.
Yes.
Amidst all of the brokenness that you just named, right? Whether it's natural disasters or economic broken systems, justice systems, economic systems, all of that. Whether it's racial tensions, the hope is the kingdom that Jesus comes to establish. The answer is Jesus, and not in some pat Sunday school way. It is restored, reconciled relationship with God and one another.
So where do we go from there?
We landed the plane.
That's what. Well, I think in that, one of the passages we were looking at here is Romans 9, and I mean even backing up into Romans 8, again talking about God's glory and how that breaks through for us personally on a personal level. But in Romans chapter 9, we really start to talk about some of these bigger or broader. He talks about Isaac. He talks about his offspring and how the younger son will serve the older son. And he says, you know what? That's God's plan. Deal with it. He talks about Pharaoh and how God hardened Pharaoh's heart and how Pharaoh leads his nation and his army into disaster. And then he uses this analogy, right, of if God is the potter and He makes some pieces for common use and He makes some pieces for noble use. And I think especially in our day and age, right, that is not, that's not PC.
Well, especially in the Western culture of American man-made, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because make me for common use, I'll elevate myself to noble use. And yet, again, some of this revolves back to what Paul says about our lives. Are our lives for us, or are they for something else, for something greater that we don't entirely see or even understand?
So this is, we've talked about different missionaries. This is Gladys Allward was one of the last stories that we read, and so she has this just god-awful journey in the late 1920s just to get to China. And so she finally gets herself a couple towns up in the mountains, and she finds herself caring for the donkeys on the mule trains that they would bring through the mountains. And she did. She said, I felt the Lord called me to China, and I guess if that's to serve at this hotel and brush down donkeys and feed them, right? Not to go there and evangelize 10 million people and baptize everybody and win the whole nation for Jesus.
She's trying to get the donkey saved.
She's in a stall. And but it's through that humbleness and that submission of, you know what, this is where the Lord's placed me, at least for now, that did lead her, onto some great things and quite literally rubbing elbows with some of the higher ups and being this trusted person and advisor in the region that she was in and able to spread the gospel message. And I think that's just for some of us too. And I wonder if that's where a lot of our problems come from, that we're just not comfortable. Right, we want what we want. Mm-hmm.
Well, we live in a world where everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants to be well known. Everybody, and so in the Christian subculture,
that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why I'm here. I don't know. The T-shirts are coming.
There's a bunch of people want to hear what 3 guys in St. Louis, Michigan have to say about theology.
My mom does. Okay. My mom probably won't even
People
watch
don't even know
this.
St. Louis, Michigan exists. They think we're Missouri, okay?
I know, I'm sorry. It's so true.
But, and so in Christian subculture, that's that's how we translate it. Well, we want to do something great for God. We want to be in the elevated, noble tier, I guess, of Christian service that does... It makes me think of a story I heard about Mother Teresa. When I was in college, we had some chapel speaker. I couldn't even tell you who it was. But he had traveled to Calcutta and worked and met with Mother Teresa and spent some time there working with her. And here he went there with this kind of maybe self-inflated view that here I am going to work with Mother Teresa. And by that time she had this tremendous reputation around the world. And that he was really going to do some incredibly meaningful work. Yeah. And I don't remember all of what his tasks were. I do remember that they were mostly demeaning, and one of them, the one that I remember, was out back behind the establishment, whatever it was, shoveling manure. And him, wait a second, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing here. I'm supposed to be working, and in conversation with her, realizing that sometimes the most humble work, is the greatest work for the kingdom. And that has stuck with me.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Since then.
Well, maybe I can speak to this because I know you guys wouldn't. Nathan and Jake have been visionaries and leaders here for the last couple of years to see a vision come true for our community. That in the Hope House, which is helping homeless people and folks that just find themselves in a tight spot. And they've been on the news and in the newspaper. And so for some of us other local pastors, we go, oh, yeah, we got the movie star pastors here.
Yeah.
But I think humbly, both these guys would tell you that, running a homeless shelter was probably not all you thought that was cracked up to be. But
it's a bit different.
But it has been a blessing to the people who have lived there and have used that as a safe harbor, right? As a time to rest, to repair, to do whatever they need. And again, your local, great way to volunteer and get involved. We have more information on that on our websites and Facebook pages. But so I think it's the same thing, right? I think
has a website.
We will, sure, yeah. Talking about things that don't exist yet. The churches, whatever. HopeHouse.com, right? I don't know. Whatever.
GCHopeHouse.org.
See, there you go. See, look, there's a website. But I think it's that same thing, right? Even I think the things that maybe look glamorous from the outside. It's probably the same thing with Mother Teresa, right? Mm-hmm. She was well known, and she was. But again, right? From all accounts I've ever heard, right, extremely humble person.
Yeah.
Probably didn't really care what people thought about her.
Correct.
On the outside world, what was going on? She was focused on the task at hand.
Yeah.
For the glory of God.
And the interesting thing with her too, her confession was that for most of her life she never felt close to God.
Yeah.
Wow.
She never felt as though she was spiritually close to him, that he was rather distant from her. And yet she, despite that, she persevered and was faithful.
Really?
Wow.
See how the camera's going to do.
So one of the things that we talked about early on before recording was talk about the glory of God showing up in people's lives, and how many times in church world, especially in the evangelical circles, we narrowly define that as people getting saved, or others coming to Christ, and that becomes the glory of God exhibited in the lives of other people, and how that is a very narrow understanding of the glory of God showing up, because it doesn't take into account the entire activity of the present kingdom of God, which we've talked about before, of being a significant understanding that we have of what God's purpose is in the world and how we're involved in that. And so one of the things that I know you had mentioned before we started recording was the path of continual service that needs to show up, and that is one of the ways the glory of God really comes to the forefront in an individual's lives, in an individual's life, and how we need to be sure as local churches and as local leaders that is something that we press into with people and say, just like you had mentioned in regards to Hope House, but it's not just there. It is, where are you serving? Where are you giving your life in service to others? Because the glory of God shows up in that space consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and as you had said earlier, that what is our life about? Is it what we want, or is it for the glory of God? And understanding that when you got salvation, one of the best definitions I've heard for salvation is telling people into a better story, right? Or inviting them into a better story. Understanding that salvation is less about your soul being spiritually cleansed so you can go to heaven someday, and is more about enlisting or covenanting into this new story. And this new way of being in the world. The gospel is more or salvation is more about a way of being in the world, and less about something we have attained spiritually.
Yeah.
And if it's about, that, then our life isn't our own.
Yeah.
Right. And understanding that we don't get to profess Jesus as Lord, and then carry on with our life in it doing whatever the heck we want.
Right.
Our life becomes His. Our world, our we were bought at a price. Right? He shed His blood so that we could have that restored relationship, so that we could participate in that better story. Right. So if that's true, then our life is all about that service. Mm-hmm. Our life is all about working for the sake of the kingdom. It is not having some box checked and then carrying on doing. Living for ourselves. And sometimes the living for ourselves is good, noble things. You should have a job, and you should like it's best if you can like your job and work and commit to it. But your
and
job
enjoying your family
and
vacations and all of that stuff.
All of that kind of stuff. That's good and noble. And I think sometimes one of Satan's greatest tricks is to make us think that those things that are good are really the best things.
Yeah.
And they're not. We trade great for good, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so realizing that if our life is for the glory of God, and we don't always get to dictate and determine what that looks like.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about this a little bit too. I don't know how that's going to join. Never mind. Like, that doesn't connect. Never mind. I don't know. Just going back to God. Fine, I'll connect it. I'll try.
Okay.
Well, just going back to God's sovereignty, right? We talked about this, I think, a week or two ago, like with the parable of the talents, right? You have a guy with 5, a guy with 2, and a guy with 1. And again, I think in our way of thinking, at least in this current culture or climate that we find ourselves in, it would say, well, you would obviously take the 1 and give it to the guy that only had 2 to get him closer to the guy with 5. That's more equitable, right? And you go, God's sovereignty was, I'll take the 1 from the guy that didn't do anything with it, and I'll give it to the guy that already had 5. And we look at that and just we don't think that that's fair. And again, I think that's just one of those things where we do, and I think this is what Paul's getting at here, back to Romans 9, of just trusting that God is that potter who has much more of the far out perspective than you do. Mm-hmm. And he can see, and then again, right back to us submitting and trusting that his plan is perfect. We talked about this earlier of other pastor friends of ours who, whether they've been super successful or they see some of their other friends super successful, whether it's on, in a big speaking circuit or they've written books and you can maybe throw a little pity party for yourself. Oh man, why am I not on that speaking circuit? Or why doesn't that organization want me to come talk for them? Or I could write a book. All those things that you go, boy, but I've called you to a place, and whether you've got one talent or two or five or whatever it may be, get to work. Mm-hmm. Get to work and serve.
Yeah. Because we often want to throw out the idea of, well, that's not fair. And we're kind of, at times, I think in our country, this certainly isn't true all the time, but at times we are obsessed with fairness.
Oh, yeah.
That we look at what somebody else has or is doing or is experiencing, and we go, well, I want that too. Okay, well, that's not, you didn't work for that. You didn't put any effort into that. You didn't discipline yourself to pursue that, and yet you want that. But the person who is doing it, they've made sacrifices, and they've prepared. They've worked their whole life. And again, this becomes really murky. So every analogy when we start talking about what it means to be in the kingdom of God, every analogy about God falls apart at some point because it's an analogy about God that we don't fully understand and can't fully understand here. So we want to be careful not to talk about how you can earn your way into the glory of God, because there's no piece of scripture that allows for that.
Right.
But God also is very clear of making sure you are taking care of the things that have been placed in your life right now. Mm-hmm. Not just hoping for a better tomorrow, not just looking for something down the road, and always, I wish I was there. I wish my thing was different. I wish my life was different, my history. The old cliche, I don't like cliches, but they work sometimes. Bloom where you're planted.
Yeah.
Take care of what you have right now, because those things are a part of your life because God has either put them there on purpose or allowed some things to happen to you, and he wants, again, this is back to our initial statement, for his glory. Mm-hmm. Your life is for his glory, whether it is through brokenness, which it's going to be, through success, which it might be, pain, difficulty, favor. All of those things are not for you alone. They are for his glory.
Yeah, we think somehow that in our culture, fairness is the greatest good.
Yeah.
And it's not. I mean, and the reality is, it's just life isn't fair.
Right. Yeah.
And
because of sin. And life is not fair because of sin.
But the truth is,
that's...
But then...
Not necessarily your sin or mine, but just...
But even that, that parable of the talents and all that, it doesn't appear to be fair, right? It's not equitable. Maybe I should say life isn't equitable.
Equitable, yeah.
Right? And it's never going to be.
Yeah.
And the truth is, just like we like what you're talking about, those who have been proven faithful with what they have, more is entrusted to them.
Right.
And if you're not faithful with what you have, then why would we trust you with more? Yeah. That principle works out in places of employment, in families, all of that kind of stuff. Parenting, yes.
I'm going to give you more rope to hang yourself. Oh, no, that's...
So,
let's see if you can handle this.
And one of the passages, as that bloom where you're planted, I think of Esther, the story of Esther.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, just real quick, Esther becomes the queen of Persia, and there is the king's right hand man kind of crafts a scenario in which the people of God are going to be. Killed, basically. Genocide, right? Yep. And Esther's cousin comes to her and through the secrecy of night and says, "You've got to do something about this." And she knows that she could be killed for even trying, but and the convincing statement is, "Who knows but that you are made for such a time as this?"
Yes.
Right? And so finally she resolves and says, "Live or die, I'm going to do what I believe God has created me to do." it's that same kind of a principle, right?
Right.
I don't, for whatever reason, God hasn't put me in this place or given me this responsibility or whatever, but I'm here now, and am I going to be trusted with what God has given me in this place, and not, and the same thing with in ministry. You have to pastor the church that you have, not the church you wish you had, right?
Yeah.
You have to care for the community you live in, not the community you wish you lived in.
Yeah.
And not try to create something. I think this is really hard, and for pastors these days, we're trying to take what works somewhere else and reduplicate it here as like some quick fix.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
God has put you in this place, and you've got to lead and serve and pastor for what this place needs.
Yeah.
Not what you wish it was, and you can't fabricate what you wish it was.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, pastors. I like that. You ready? So, in all seriousness, what do you say? I've run across people that same thing. Maybe hate. Let's put all judgment aside or whatever. Maybe one talent people that say, "Man, 5 years ago, I think I really had my moment for what God put me on earth for." And ever since 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever that moment was, right? They've been aimless, purposeless, whatever. Well, I think maybe I've already fulfilled my one thing that God put me on earth. What do you say to somebody that is maybe stuck in that place? Of going, I think I had my moment to shine, and it was 7 years ago, and I saved that guy's life. Whatever it may be. How do you encourage somebody to?
That's how encouraging it is. My initial reaction is if you're still on this side of the dirt, you're not done yet.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would say it quite like that.
Yeah.
I might. You never know.
If you're alive, you still have more to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason that you're alive is because God is not finished with you yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because of good luck or good health. Those things may have played a role, but if you're still, I like that. If you're still on this side of the dirt, God's not done with you yet.
Well, in all honesty, as I'm thinking through that question, I mean, I've had even older folks in your congregation, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm still here.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure you guys have both heard that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why the Lord's still keeping me around. And it is one of those things where you go, well, you're blessing me right now, right?
Right.
And again, you love to hear the life stories, the experiences, the faith, the testimonies.
Mm-hmm. I kind of wonder if part of the issue with that kind of statement, I don't know why I'm still here. I think my purpose was a decade ago. Part of the issue there is you stopped looking.
Yeah.
You thought that was the mountaintop. You thought that was the thing. That was the one deal that God had for you. Mm. And you decided to stop looking and just go, I'm going to live off of this. Now, that probably wasn't a conscious decision.
Right.
But somewhere along the way, you decided, I think I'm done.
Wow.
You stopped looking. You stopped pursuing God. Because if you are in constant pursuit of God, He's going to show you that you're not done. Mm-hmm. And if you're in constant pursuit of God, you're not going to be allowed to drift into that, because that's all it is. It is a mental and spiritual drift from pursuit of God into stagnation. You don't make that decision in one day and you go, oh yeah, yesterday I did X and now I'm done. That's not an overnight decision.
Right.
That is a slow burn.
Well, and I think this goes back to I stole part of our discussion last week and preached on it. The Jeremiah 20, the Jeremiah 29 of build houses, settle down, and plant a garden. Right? That you go, you know what? Sometimes maybe your mission isn't something super sexy, right? Something that's and that God does want you just to just be faithful, right? Be faithful, keep plugging away.
I mean, that's if the Christian life is primarily about being a faithful witness, right, to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, then most of the time, those talent moments are probably going to be pretty indistinguishable from everything else. Yeah. And the fact that we're looking for the big things like that is further evidence of our desire to be famous Christian, that we've done something big.
Superhero.
People who, when I think about their pastors, some of my biggest heroes are not the pastors who lead the biggest churches or make it to higher levels of leadership, right? It's the men and women who have served in churches of 35 people for their entire career, faithfully serving the church, being a faithful witness in that community. Those are the folks. I mean, and not to diminish what other folks do and the accomplishments of, but how many...
Because we easily turn this into a contest. Well, who suffered more?
Right.
Because God's most happy with the ones who suffered more. I don't know. There's theology to back that up.
No. I mean, look at. I've heard it said this way: who was pastoring the mega churches when Saint Francis of Assisi was wandering around doing his right? He in his life he was inconspicuous.
Yeah.
People didn't pay attention to Francis.
Yeah.
They paid attention to his writings and things after he died.
Right.
I mean, well, look at even Paul, right? I mean, it's I'm going to go
Yeah.
here. We'll get church going. I'm going to go here. Get a church going. I'm going to, I mean, it was just this.
And in between, I'm going to get arrested and beaten and shipwrecked and everything else.
And that not to diminish the work of big church pastors or any of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just to say
not our point.
that if it's about being a faithful witness, that most of the time our most significant moments are going to go unnoticed by us. But to think about the impacts of others. Sometimes you wonder about what will people say about you when you're gone, right? And my guess is, and some of the funerals I have been at, the most defining moments that people have had in their lives, somebody who's deceased, and others share about the moments where that person's life made an impact on them. Odds are that person hadn't even remembered it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it did something within the lives of some others.
And just
all for the glory of God.
Yes. Just a word about those that do have that fame and recognition. There is a faithfulness that they are living into as well. Because I have sat in conferences and services where I never got to meet the one who spoke something that was meaningful. I mean, like, just blew my mind about something that God was asking me to do, or kicked open another door that God was waiting for me to walk through. And I don't ever get to know them. There's been a couple of people that have spoken in those settings into my life when I've been able to say, hey, thank you for that. And, if I was really pinpointing it, I could go back and say, I was in this service. I remember sitting in the balcony over on the left side. And there's no way he would have remembered that, because that was like 30 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was important for that moment. He was being faithful to what God was asking him to do in that moment.
To that point, the reason I'm here is because one day in 2007, Francis Chan was faithful to whatever God had put on his heart at a Nazarene youth conference.
Yeah,
right? Right. I mean, so you're right. There is still a great deal for those leaders,
Amen.
of faithfulness.
Yeah.
And there you go. The Potter has crafted them for that, right?
Yes.
And as much as some may want that thing, that Christian infamy. Maybe you wouldn't have been able to handle it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you don't know that, but
now let's turn that scripture on its head, just as we pass by it. What if the common use and the noble use in our definition are flipped in God's economy?
You mean like the last will be first and the first will be last?
Yes, because that seems more likely than how we define those things. It didn't occur to me until what
that sounds like episode 2.
It does.
Well, that's what I don't know if maybe to piggyback on that a little bit. We have a couple of wonderful special needs folks that worship with us, and I have made the statement before, and others have, I think, been in total agreement with it. So for eternity, I will be waiting on their tables, right? You know what I mean? And so, again, what the world would look at as a common use item, yes, in God's economy, he said, no, this is the noble vessel.
Yeah.
This is the nice piece, but you missed it. I think Indiana Jones, right, in the Last Crusade there with all the chalices, right?
Yeah.
And he picks the crummiest
The carpenter's
one.
cup.
Yeah, the simplest one. And I don't know, man. I'm getting goosebumps. I think that's good. I like that.
It's good.
I like that. Is that a good place to land?
I think so. I believe so.
All right. Well, again, God bless you, and hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to a podcast or something, give us a I don't know, a thumbs up, a like,
sure.
Subscribe, whatever. We would appreciate it. To our website that doesn't exist. I don't know, whatever. We'll figure it out.
We're super professional.
We are, dude.
We know what we're doing.
Our logo's cool. Wait till you see our logo.
Yeah,
be good. So, hopefully you saw it at the beginning of the video that we haven't edited yet. So that's all good. God bless you and have a great day.